Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine no more countries. It isn't hard to do. No need to kill or die for. No religions too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you care. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. You hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one.
Well, good evening and welcome to another Restore Live. Restore Live going out yet again on another Wednesday evening. And this week we have entitled this screen, we have entitled it, Imagine No Possessions, Nothing to Kill or Die For. And you'll have heard there the song by John Lennon. However, it was a cover version that we've been playing. But you heard that song, and, you know, in the words of that song, there is, you know, ideological aspirations, let's just say. And we can break that song down as we go. But just try to imagine, no possessions, nothing to kill or die for. And then we look at what's happening across the world in Ukraine, like other places before. We try to make sense of things as it goes. And often it would be very, very hard to make sense if you were to listen, say, to the mainstream media. And given that there's a blackout of media coming from some sources that you would really, really need in order to piece things together, well, for the ordinary person, things are very hard to piece together. But what must be said, no matter what side of this equation that you stand on, no matter why you think that people from the West should push against Russia consuming the land of Ukraine, no matter why you are thinking that should be done, or whether or not that you're thinking that maybe they should draw back, maybe they should try to avert a world crisis, no matter what side that you come down on. Well, the reality is that the people in Ukraine, the ordinary decent people that didn't ask for this, the ordinary decent people who are like pawns on a chessboard, well, they are the real losers. And this you will see as we go along in this screen. Now, this is something that we at Restore should not be doing. And the reason why we shouldn't be doing it is because it's going to be highly controversial. But sometimes, in order for common sense to prevail, the truth must be told. And what we need to do is that we need to call out aggression and manipulation and lies and spin and swindle and fudge. We need to call that out from no matter where that is coming from, no matter why that's from the supposed quote unquote our own side, or whether that's from the opposite side of any given equation. Today in 2022, not long after a COVID crisis, in where that the world, they had been told that many of us were going to die, and many people did actually die as a result of the virus that they got. Well, not long after one crisis, we are seemingly into another, in where that many people across the Western world, well, they're not getting any respite from the type of fear and the fear mongering and the mass manipulation which is coming from the mainstream media. Well, they're not getting any respite from that. And all I can say in 2022, in March of 2022, shame on them. Shame on the people who would be the aggressors, the people who are wanting to aggress upon land in a very, very dangerous, volatile place, I may add. Shame on them. And shame on them for causing the human suffering which has gripped and which is sweeping the land of Ukraine tonight in March of 2022. So people, before that we move on, what I want to do is that we've got a bit of, I'm going to say that we've got a chain of events lined up for you. And I'm asking people to, if as per usual, that what you would do is that you would tune in, or that you would tag people into the live chat, that you would share this platform, you would share it far and wide, you would share this into closed groups, into open Facebook pages, into wherever it is that you can share it. Send to your nearest and dearest, send links to Messenger. Try to attract to hear as many people as is humanly possible. And this evening, people, and this isn't about one side or the other. Tonight, this is about people. And this is about how that in a rich man's game, how that in what could become a rich man's war, well, poor men could lose their lives. And in this rich man's war, the real cost of a war, should it happen, would be poor man's blood. As we move on this evening, I'm asking people to pay particular attention to the chain of events as we unfold them. I mean, what is happening in Ukraine? Well, it's not a million miles away from what has happened here in Northern Ireland. And we are going to, in a very conclusive way, this evening at Restore UK, we're going to prove that the manipulators, well, the same manipulators who we showed were manipulating things into place in Northern Ireland, well, that same manipulative hand, well, it has been playing a part in manipulating the circumstances in where war could occur in the Ukraine and in the surrounding areas. So before that we move on with Ukraine, I'm just going to get something out of the road. Now, over the past few days, whilst that we were doing some research, whilst that we were checking, double checking, quadrupling, checking everything that we were going to show this evening, whilst that we were doing that, well, we found time also to put together a little promotional video. And in this promotional video, you'll see the new brand of British Unionist politicians, taken from a time in July or in December of 2019, in the run up to the general election and going forward. Well, you'll see certain characters within this promotional video that we decided that we would put together, and I want each and every one of you to watch it. And then whenever we watch this little promotional video, well, we'll come back, we'll make one more request, and then we'll be moving on with the things that we want to move on with, and the research we will be unfolding, and that we've spent so many hours over the past few days doing such research. So here we go. What I want to do is that I want to play a little promotional video, and please leave your messages in the live chat. And you can tell us what it is that you think of this promotional video, what it is that you think of our newfound capabilities. You know, we're getting better. We're getting better because of the people that come to visit here every week. We're getting better because that we need to be better. And when there's a need, well, some people understands that because of that need, well, we'll leave no stone unturned. And we'll try everything in order to make ourselves more professional here at Restore, in order that we can, well, tell the truth as it would unfold to us. So just playing us on with this little promotional video, and we'll be back shortly after this with one more request, and then we'll be getting on with what it is that we're here to do this evening at Restore UK. 100th anniversary of Northern Ireland, and we do hope that there's going to be a good turnout.
There's a window over here on your right, far side of the City Hall. We were given this information that this was the Irish Department for Foreign Affairs, is that right?
What brings our collective love for Ulster to this place and this day?
Again in Tullyhammon, what you'll notice is that the main street is actually just behind us, just literally behind where the camera is here, just a few yards from me. But if you look down this street,
Reminder of the courage and sacrifice of so many young Ulstermen. I was 16 years old in 1969 when the British Army deployed onto the streets of Northern. I made a decision that tens of thousands of young Ulstermen had made before me, and I joined the British Army.
I mean, if I were to drop a letter in here, could we get it to Simon Coveney? And all we wanted to do is we want to invite him on our show, basically to come and talk to British Unionists. What we think is that he's not really taking into consideration British Unionist concerns over this protocol.
Well, there you go. That was the little promotion that we put together. And what you'll have noticed a couple of things in that little video. Well, that was, I guess, a caption or a succession of things that we had actually done since the December of 2019. And I still have the raw footage of the Ulster Hall rally, and we're meaning to put it into a documentary. And well, we're going to do it. We're going to do it, and we're going to make that available for everyone to see. Now, there's a great deal of time that it takes to put things together, just like that was put together there. I mean, that the man hours that was involved in that, searching for the videos, cutting the videos, clipping the videos, putting all the videos together, the music, the bits and pieces together, the man hours that was involved in that. Probably took somewhere in the region from about 3 o'clock in the day till about 1 o'clock in the morning, putting everything together. So that just shows you what can go into a 2.5 minute clip. If that 2.5 minute clip is going to be done in a way that it has, well, I'm going to say that it has professionalism actually attached. So anyway, what we want to do before that we move on with what it is that we're here to do this evening is that we want to ask people, we'll ask people now, and we'll ask people again at the very, very end, that if you can help our work, well, we're going to pop up a link here into the live chat, and that's a PayPal link, and that's in the live chat, and it's in Restore UK. You'll find it on the live chat on Facebook. You'll find it in the British Unionist People's Voice on Facebook, and you'll also find it at Restore UK. Again, that's on the YouTube channel. And if you can help our work here at Restore, what you can do is that you can click on that link and you can put a few pounds in. And well, what it does is that it helps make us what it is that we have become, and what it is that we will continue on the journey, on the trajectory in where that we hope that someday soon that we will be the go-to people's media here in Northern Ireland, when, as Orwell would have said, in times of universal deceit, well, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. That makes us at Restore revolutionaries in terms of what it is that we do here, in terms of our people's media platform, a platform for the people and by people, telling the truth in times of universal deceit. So here we are this evening. Broaching a subject from a completely different angle that I guess that a lot of people they wouldn't dare actually show the reality as it would be unfolding. But I believe as a person that what you have to do is that you have to point out corruption where that it exists. I mean, for what use is free speech if you're not allowed to use it? For what use are you permitted in a democracy to your freedom to have freedom of speech, your freedom of expression, your right to criticize bad law, your right to point out corruption where it is that you see that is happening? For what use is it having those rights if at a time whenever that you notice that there are certain things that don't look right? For what use is you have those rights within a democracy, and that you don't actually use them, that you turn a blind eye? And why? And that's because that you have an allegiance to a particular tribe. But what if what it is that tribe is doing could cause problems for ordinary people right across the Western world? I'm saying, what if they could cause problems? Look at the price of fuel. Look at the price of your home heating oil. Look at the price of your gas, which will have a knock-on effect to the food that you buy in the shops. And soon, for a lot of people, it is going to be the choice between eating and actually heating. And I know that the left-wing ideologues, I know that those that with an agenda that would like to see globalization taking hold, I know that those people would be saying, well, what if Putin and the Russians, well, what if they take over the world? What if they aggress upon another country? But what if people, that this crisis could have been averted a long time ago? What if that Ukraine could have been left as a neutral? And what if that well, if both sides were honourable within this equation, well then, you wouldn't be paying the prices for your fuel that you would be paying today. You wouldn't be paying the cost for the home heating oil, the gas. You wouldn't be paying the extra costs in your food and every single area of your life. But what if, people? What if, imagine that it is some ideologue's notion that there should be no possessions, that there should be nothing to kill or die for. Well, that all sounds fanciful, but put it into practice, well, this is what happens. What you're about to see as we unfold it, this is what happens whenever some people some people with power say, no, thank you. We will continue to live as we've always been living. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do is that we have to draw back a wee bit to some of the things that we've talked about on the Restore channel over the past few weeks. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make a connection, a connection with what that we have shown here within the past 5 or 6 weeks, and how that it is that those same mechanisms are manipulating things, and in a way which is making the world a more dangerous, a more expensive, and a more volatile place than anyone could ever imagine. People should be paramount, not just the people of Ukraine. And personally, I have to say, those poor people, those poor people. But, right around the Western world right now, there are things happening in Australia. There are things happening in places like New Zealand. There are things happening in places like Canada. And yet the mainstream media, they aren't talking about the totalitarians that are forcing things into place, that are removing people's freedoms, that are creating the circumstances in where that ordinary, decent citizens, well, they're being treated like, it's very, very hard to put a label on how that these people are treated. But for an example, in Canada, just a few weeks ago, because the people had the audacity to protest against things that they did not give their authority to do, because they had the audacity to protest. Well, when that protest, when it grew legs, when it became, let's say, that a lot of people were joining with the protest and a lot of people were supporting the protest, didn't the Canadian government move to close down people's bank accounts? Didn't they move to anybody that was supporting the protests in Canada? Didn't they restrict? Didn't they lock them out of their bank accounts? Now, to me, people, that is a bridge too far. To me, that isn't an open liberal democracy. That isn't democracy. That isn't a place in where that the people elect politicians in order to serve and protect them. But yet, the Western world media, just like puppets on a little string, they read the script that they've been given to read, and what that script is actually doing is that script is robbing you, is robbing me, is robbing everyone else of the truth. In times of universal deceit, we are robbed of that truth. And as Orwell would have said, I'll quote it again, in times of universal deceit, telling the truth will be a revolutionary act. Well, that makes us here at Restore revolutionaries. But sometimes some things, and I've said this before, are worth standing up for. Sometimes some things are worth pointing out. Sometimes some things are worth exposing. And we'll not be shirking from our responsibilities to bring the people here at Restore and anyone else that will come along to watch this in the future, no matter why you're black or white, no matter whether you're Protestant or Catholic, no matter who you are. Everyone is welcome here to see what it is that's going on, and in a way that, well, you're not seeing through your mainstream media. So starting off with something that we were showing just a few weeks ago. Where I want to start is just slightly before the execution of John F. Kennedy many, many years ago, just before his untimely death. He was speaking out about something, and we're going to let you hear that very speech that some would say cost him his life. Listen very, very carefully to these words as they're spoken. And again, I ask people to tag people into the live chat, because what we're going to do is that we're going to follow a pattern of events, and we're going to show in a conclusive way that, well, all that glitters, well, sometimes it's not actually the gold that it's painted out to be. So over to this speech by JFK before his untimely death.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
So there was a speech by John F. Kennedy before his untimely death. And what, if you listen to those words, what he was exposing was that there are those that are not using democratic means, that they're using subversion, that they're using all form of manipulation, that there is no expense spared whenever these people, whenever they want to change things right across the Western world. And they are my words that I've added. But what you need to be able to do, and I know that people right now, they're looking at the East versus West thing. But the truth of the matter is, people, think of the people that are in the middle, the ordinary, decent people. That's in Ukraine. Think of the people in other countries that has gone before, and think of the situation in where that ordinary, decent people are the losers, the real losers, whenever things would happen. So here we go. We're going to play on. Now, what we're going to do at this stage is that we're going to play another little video clip. And we're going to play a little video clip of just from a few weeks ago. We played it here in Restore. And we played it here on Restore of a man called Chuck Feeney, and how that it was that the CIA were used in Northern Ireland to manipulate particular things into place. Now, I want for you to listen to these words, and listen to these words very, very carefully, because it talks about a place very, very near to Estonia, in where that Chuck Feeney had indicated to a professor from a Limerick university to go and to reach out to a university in Estonia, and to, well, I'll let you hear in the words of this very man about what it was that Chuck Feeney had asked him to do.
This was a man who many say could blend in, disappear. No wonder the CIA came knocking. Like so much with Chuck, who knows? Half a century after that visit, Chuck's embroiled in the Northern Ireland peace process, albeit without anyone realising.
One time he called and I just happened to answer the phone at home, and he said, "Hey Tommy, I'm in New York City. Can you do me a favor and pick me up at the train station tomorrow at 10:30? And I asked Chuck where we were going, and Chuck said, "We're going to go out to Western New Jersey. Have you ever heard of a place called Bedminster?" So I said, "Yeah, I know where it is. I can get there." So we headed out that way, and when we got to the destination in Bedminster, and I pulled in, and the next thing I saw, there were Secret Servicemen there, and they had armed guns on them, and so I dropped Chuck off at the front, and I stayed outside with the Secret Service. An hour later, he came back out, and he said, "Yeah, I just talked to Bill Clinton. He was a pretty interesting guy." And I said, "Well, what did you talk to him about?" And he said, well, at that time, he had mentioned that he was interested in the affairs in Ireland because these people over there are having a lot of suffering is going on, and there's a lot of violence there. So
he often came into my office unexpectedly and in a shabby raincoat, and he'd open his briefcase and he'd have newspaper cuttings, and he'd seem to hand them to me at random, not saying very much. It was made quite clear to me by those who minded him to maintain his secrecy. He never really directly asked me to do anything except once, and it was when the Baltic states, when the Berlin Wall coming down and the Baltic states were attempting to break free from Moscow. And he said to me, "Ed, do you know much about Estonia?" I said, "I know little or nothing about Estonia, Chuck." Well, he said, "They're a university in the second city, Tartu. Would you think of going there and forming a link with that university? I think I'd like to see the Estonian universities forming links with the West." It was still very much under Moscow's domination. I was met there by the communist leadership from Tartu, who had a rickety old Volkswagen van, which we drove through the night from Leningrad to Tartu. And I found myself in the hands of the Communist Party there and signed an agreement with the rector. But it turned out that Chuck had been helping behind the scenes to assist the people in the Baltic states who were attempting to break free from the grip of Moscow. He established in Dublin a centre to help the leadership, potential leadership from the Baltic states. And it turned out that many of those who have done wonderful work in Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania attended that centre in Dublin that Chuck set up. So in his absolutely strategic way, he made things happen, identified potential leadership, supported it and trusted it.
So what you'll have heard there is something that we had been playing just a few weeks ago with reference Northern Ireland, and how that a man called Chuck Feeney, that his own family said that he worked for the CIA, that how that he was here and how that he was manipulating Northern Ireland from 1984, from my recollection, and how that it was that Chuck Feeney, he liaised with a man in Limerick. And what you'll have heard there, if you'll listen very, very carefully, is that the head of the university in Limerick, Chuck Feeney, asked that man to go out to Estonia and to form relationships with the universities in Estonia. And, you know, if you had went on listening to the entire audio of the Chuck Feeney expose, let's just say, what would have happened is that the idea was that the Limerick professor could have made some liaisons with the Estonia University. in order to create the circumstances from within in the university that people would be standing against Russia. Now, that's all very well. I mean, this is what happens, I guess, in war. This is what happens. But what if that what is happening right now will be the cause of so many deaths? What if something that is happening right now, which doesn't actually need to happen? And this we hope to show you as time goes on from within this broadcast. But what if that all that is required is for the West to sit back and to designate the Ukraine as a neutral state? And by doing that, well, you would assume, well, according to some experts, that what would happen is that Russia then would have they wouldn't have a moral leg to stand on in terms of the aggression into Ukraine. So what I want to be able to do by moving on, and I realize that this isn't some people's cup of tea, because some people have allegiances, but the truth really needs to be told. So what we're going to do is that we're going to press on, telling this truth and letting you hear the truth, and in a way that this can be documented for others to come and see at any point in the future. And I have absolutely no doubt that there will be many people that will actually pore over this very video. They'll be looking for fault. They'll be looking for, I don't know, they'll be looking to maybe try to discredit the video. But here's the reality, people. The reality is that ordinary people in Ukraine are losing their lives, and they didn't ask for this. And ordinary people, the Western world wide, are going through huge hardship in terms of the cost of their heating oil, the cost of their gas, the cost of their fuel for their cars, the cost, and we see it happening, the cost of everything that would flow in terms of your food and anything that you do, because the cost of living as a result of what's happening in Ukraine, it will be going through the roof. And then there's the other aspect, there's the human aspect in terms of, well, now that there's going to be a mass movement of people from Ukraine being settled all around the world, well, overburdening countries that are already overburdened. Now, it is absolutely right, and let me make this very, very clear. It is absolutely right that whenever there is real hardship, like we see in Ukraine, that the Western world would do their bit and they would help and they would take people in from Ukraine. But the reality is, or should I say, what if it never had to happen in the first place? What if that there are some warmongers, the Biden administration, what if those warmongers, well, what if that they have vested interest in trying to ensure that this pushes on, and this pushes on in a way that they benefit, and the rest of the world in terms of the people, well, they all lose. Playing you from something that we came across whilst researching this, and then we went and we had to research what it is that we seen in order that we don't bring any information that is false to Restore UK, because we have to be able to stand and hold our hands and our hearts on what it is that we hear. So there was a huge amount of research went into actually looking back and trying to understand, is this the absolute truth? So here we go.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thanks all for coming out to hear me talk. The subject I want to talk about is the causes and consequences of the Ukraine crisis, which of course has been in the news in a really big way since February 2014. And indeed, there was a big story on the civil war in eastern Ukraine in the newspapers this morning. The outline I'd like to follow is, I'd just like to make a number of preliminary comments to give you some background on this crisis. Then I'd like to give you my thinking on what caused the crisis. Then tell you why I think the conventional wisdom is wrong. talk a little bit about the West's response so far to the crisis, which is just, in my opinion, making a bad situation worse. Done. And then finally wrap up with some discussion of the consequences.
So let me just say at this point, I mean, this man who's speaking at a Chicago University, a professor, and what he's doing is that he's outlining where this all started, and he's outlining the causes of what you see on your news today. And and he's going to outline the staging points and the staging posts, the important parts of why that it is that we've ended up in the position that we've ended up in today. Now, this man isn't actually saying or blaming anyone, but what he is saying is that he's using his right to free speech to say that he believes that what is happening from a Western standpoint, well, it has to be wrong, and it really needs to be called out for what it is. And as you will go on, you see, the thing is that you are not seeing the two sides of the news, because in any time where a war would occur, and we all, those of us that are old enough and wise enough to understand this, well, in times of war, the first casualty would be the truth, because we're not allowed to compare side by side. Now that we know that there's huge amounts of propaganda right now that comes from both sides, but what if that this doesn't actually need to happen? What if this never needed to happen? What if there was an easy solution to this problem? A solution, I may add, that some people, they just don't think that it was worth actually grabbing onto this solution that would have saved millions and millions and millions of lives. Because this is what this could actually escalate to. This could escalate to, well, this could be the Third World War in its embryonic form. If we actually look at this in terms of where that things could actually end up, and who that it is that could join in and take sides actually either end. And and all because that some people's ideology, and I stress this and I can't emphasize this enough, all because that for ideological reasons, some people, well, they think that subversion in order to create globalization. Now, we've seen that in our own country in Northern Ireland, but they think subverting the democracy, subverting the system that is there to serve and protect you and serve and protect me, well, they think that for ideological reasons, well, they can turn the system that provides us stability on its head, causing instability in the process. So I just thought that I would, and I will stop and start this as I go on, but for those of you who are still here, who can literally, who want to hear the truth, who are willing to open their minds to see the truth, well, for those of you that are still here, I would like to ask you to follow what it has happened from stage one of this war, going right through till today's date, in where that now what we have is that we have aggression from the Soviet Union, from the Russians into Ukraine. And you're going to learn something that you probably don't know through what it is that this man is actually saying. So I'm asking people to stay tuned in and to listen to the words very, very, very carefully.
So let me start with some preliminary comments. First, with regard to America's core strategic interests. For me, core strategic interests are areas of the world where you're willing to fight and die. And in my opinion, outside of the Western Hemisphere, which is of enormous strategic importance to us, there are only 3 areas of the world that really matter. 1 is Europe, 2 is Northeast Asia, and 3 is the Persian Gulf. And it's very important to understand that since this country got its independence in 1783, Europe has been the most important area of the world. Even though the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor, we had a Europe first policy going into the war, and we had a Europe first policy throughout the war. And it's in large part because the great powers in Europe are more important than the great powers in Northeast Asia over time. And of course, the Persian Gulf was an important area because that's where the oil is, and oil is a critical resource that matters greatly in the international system. So those are the three most important areas outside the Western Hemisphere. And again, since the beginning of this country, Europe has been number one. You want to understand that we're undergoing a fundamental shift of great importance. Asia, because of the rise of China, is going to be the most important area of the world for the United States. The Persian Gulf, because it's inextricably linked with Asia, oil flowing to India, oil flowing to China, the Persian Gulf will be number two, and Europe will be a distant three. We're basically leaving Europe in the rearview mirror. And of course, you want to keep this in mind because the Ukraine crisis is in Europe and it involves NATO. Just how to think about the geography of Europe. This is a simple, if not simplistic, way of thinking about it. But here's a map. You can see where Ukraine is. You can see where Poland is. You can see where Russia is. The way I think about European security is there's France, Germany, Poland, Ukraine, and Russia. Of course, we're moving from west to east. These are the big kahunas. These are the big countries that matter. And of course, the two countries that matter the most historically are Germany and Russia, or for most of the 20th century, Germany and the Soviet Union. And I put them in red because, as you well know, both Germany and the Soviet Union fought bitter wars in Poland, in Ukraine, and we could add in Belarus as well, if need be. But as we go along here, you want to keep in mind that Ukraine is right next to Russia, and Poland is right next to Ukraine. And then out further west is Germany and France. Take this a step further. This is the ethnic breakdown of Ukraine. I'm going to show you a number of maps, all of which are designed to show you that Ukraine is a badly divided country, and what's taking place inside Ukraine today is in good part a civil war. And to that extent, it doesn't have that much to do with what the Russians or the West are doing there. And as you can see in red are mostly Ukrainian-speaking people. And then as you move further east, you're talking about lots of Russians and certainly lots of Russian speakers. This is the Ukraine election of 2004. This is the election in the wake of the famous Orange Revolution, which I'll talk more about. As you can see, the country is badly divided between the East and the West. The Russian speakers in the East and the Ukrainian speakers in the West. This is the 2010 election, which resulted in Yanukovych getting elected. I'll talk about President Yanukovych as we go along. He was elected in 2010. And you can see there the voting patterns in the 2010 election look a lot like the voting patterns in the 2004 election. And then these are two recent surveys that came out from the International Republican Institute, that's here in the United States. This one says, if Ukraine could enter only one international economic union, which of the following should it be? And of course, the blue is the EU, and the light blue is the customs union, or actually the red is the customs union of Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. And the cities up at the top are in Western Ukraine, and the cities down on the bottom are in Eastern Ukraine. So you can see very clearly that people in the West would like to join the EU. People in the East have little interest in joining the EU. Those are the EU numbers. Here are the NATO numbers. I mean, these two charts look virtually the same. But all of this tells you that you have a badly divided country.
I would just like to stop at this point and, to try to explain Ukraine under this International Republican Institute survey of May 2015. And you'll go on here to see another version of this. But if you look at the red and the grey, and then if you look at the blue, and you look at how that that is actually lined out. I mean, that is slightly more split in terms of what is deemed to be west, as opposed to what is deemed to be east. East being the red and the grey in the equation here. You see, so what we've got to understand is that Ukraine is populated by Ukrainians, number one, but also by Russians hugely from the east of the equation here, and there's been a war there for a very, very long time. So this isn't clear cut. This isn't clear cut that where there's a lot of people in Ukraine that actually support Russia. So there is. So I just want you to listen to this man, and I want you to try to make sense of what it is that's happening in Ukraine based on what it is that you see and how that it is that the evidence is actually being laid down, not what it is that you are hearing in your mainstream media today in 2022.
And the conflict between the West and Russia over Ukraine is played out in the context of this situation. This is a simple little view graph that shows Europe's dependence on Russian gas. It's quite clear from that view graph that many of the countries in Eastern Europe and even countries like Germany are heavily dependent on Russian natural gas. And of course, that gives the Russians lots of political leverage in this crisis, and it makes it very difficult for us to put pressure on the Russians. Okay, those are just a number of preliminary comments I wanted to throw out just to set this up. Let's talk about the causes of the conflict. I think if you're going to talk about the causes of the conflict, you have to come at it from three different perspectives. First of all, you have to ask, what are the deep causes of the crisis? What are the structural factors that underpin this conflict? Then you have to talk about the precipitating causes, because the crisis broke out on February 22nd, 2014. Things were not terrible until February 22nd, 2014. And that's when everything went to hell in a handbasket. And the question is, what caused it then? If you focus on deep causes, it can't tell you why something happened in February 2014, but the precipitating causes are designed to get at that. And then what we want to talk about is the Russian reaction, why the Russians did what they did with regard to Crimea, with regard to Eastern Ukraine. We want to talk about exactly what they did and then why they did it. So let's start with the deep causes. My argument is that the West is principally responsible for this mess, not the Russians. This, of course, is not the conventional wisdom in the United States. And in fact, except for Steve Cohen, who's now at Princeton, now at NYU, he used to be at Princeton, Henry Kissinger, and maybe a handful of other people, there are not many people who agree with me. But I think the facts are quite clear on this, that the West is responsible. And my aim is that the main deep causes, the aim of the United States and its European allies, to peel Ukraine away from Russia's orbit and incorporate it into the West. Our basic goal has been to make Ukraine a Western bulwark on Russia's border. And Russia says, this ain't happening, period, end of story. And we will do everything we can to make sure it does not happen. That's the deep cause. Now, take it a step further. There are three key elements in our strategy. The first is NATO expansion, and in many ways the most important. And I'll talk in some detail about that in a second. But as you all know, since the Cold War ended, starting with the Clinton administration, we have been moving NATO eastward toward Russia's border. And the Russians have said, this is an absolute no-no. And I'll walk you through the story in a minute. Second is EU expansion. EU expansion is all about integrating Ukraine economically into the West. The way
Now, I'd just like to stop for a moment there, and something that we learned through Chuck Feeney, and how that Chuck Feeney went to Limerick University, how that Chuck Feeney he got the head of Limerick University to go on a jolly to Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, which was the furthest away one, and how that he asked the man in charge of Limerick University to form allegiance with that university. And I heard the full text of what it was that was being said in that, and the reality was that they were trying to ensure that the Russians they didn't have any influence in the universities. So this is how that things were actually happening. Now, some people would say that if they're pushing in democracy, well, that's a good thing. If they're pushing in Western values, as we have known Western values, well, that also is a good thing. That is a good thing for people. And what we learned in places like Afghanistan, well, you see, it just wasn't about going and fighting with the Taliban. It was about complete and utter societal change. And what was it they were trying to push into Afghanistan? Well, they were trying to push in what they think. What they are saying is Western values. Now, some of us, in fact, most of us here in Restore, will look at some of those values and think, well, they're not our values. They're not the values that we grew up with. We don't believe that there's 101 different genders. We don't believe that, that a woman can be a man because he says that he's a woman. We don't believe that. Now, that's up to people who want to do that, and I have absolutely no gripe with them. That's up to them if they want to do that, and if they want to believe that, they can move on and they can do whatever they want. But you see, some of these people in these different countries in which they are aggressing against, well, they have their own way of life. They have their own beliefs, their own religions, and a lot of these things that are being pushed in, well, as we would have seen in Afghanistan, well, they were having none of it. They were absolutely having none of it. And whenever that we look at world affairs, and as I would have explained just a few weeks ago, whenever I was talking about the south of Cameroon, the place that became Ambazonia, well, that was another situation in where that it was a fight over land. It was a rich man's fight over land, trying to aggress upon the land, trying to consume the land, trying to take the land, and trying to force in for their own ideological reasons, trying to force into a place which had their own beliefs, a completely set of different belief systems. So I'm just trying to give a bit of context as to what this man is actually speaking about. So for those of you that are still here, we reckon that this is being manipulated this evening. A lot of people can't get on. A lot of people are saying that they can't find the stream. But for documentary purpose, we're going to press on and we're going to document exactly what it is that we're doing here this evening. And you see, this is the world that we're living in today, is that telling the truth is, and I said it at the start, and I had absolutely no reason to disbelieve my own words, that telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And sometimes you're putting yourself in danger to actually try to tell the people the truth as it would have happened. Now, let's play on and let's listen to this man, because this is an education. This is an education on the entire Ukraine circumstances, really from the tipping point in 2014, and you're going to hear about that going forward. And we're not going to go the entire hog with this video clip, but there are certain things that you need to know and that you need to understand with reference Ukraine. Now, again, I'm going to stress is that what is happening to the people in Ukraine, the ordinary, decent people that didn't ask for this, it is unacceptable. It is unforgivable, and it should never be happening to ordinary people. I'm going to say again that in a rich man's desire to consume land, well, the cost of that consuming land is poor man's blood.
We are in the process of integrating Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, the Baltic states into the West. And of course, we're doing that with NATO as well. These are two sets of institutions: NATO, military institution; the EU, an economic institution. And the idea, again, is to take Ukraine, peel it away from Russia, make it part of the West. The third part of the story is fostering an orange revolution. This is all about promoting democracy in Ukraine and in other places. As you all know, the United States runs around the world trying to topple regimes and put in their place democratically elected regimes. And for almost all of you, me included, it's hard to be against promoting democracy. We all love democracy. But if you're Vladimir Putin, or if you're part of the leadership in Beijing, when the United States talks about democracy promotion, that means toppling your regime. And you won't be surprised to hear this. They don't like that in Beijing, and they don't like that in Moscow. Right? They do not like that. Right? The Chinese believe that we're behind the protests in Hong Kong. You go to Beijing and you talk to Chinese elites, the idea that we're promoting democracy around the world, and especially in East Asia, just drives them crazy, because they think they're in the crosshairs. And you know what? They are in the crosshairs, because our basic strategy is to topple regimes all over the world, not simply because we like democracy, but because we believe that whoever gets elected will be pro-Western. So we're killing two birds with one stone. We're promoting democracy and getting leaders who are pro-American. But again, you can see the strategy here: NATO expansion, EU expansion, and promoting democracy. Say a bit more about NATO expansion because it's so important. NATO expansion took place in two tranches. The first one was in 1999. That's when you get Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary incorporated into NATO. The second big tranche was in 2004. And that's when the Baltic states, you can see Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania up top, Romania, Bulgaria, these are the light brown countries. That's the second tranche of NATO expansion. Now, the Soviets made it clear from the mid-1990s they were adamantly opposed to NATO expansion. But number one, they were too weak to do anything about it. And two, it didn't involve the states that were right on their border. I mean, there's no question, as you can see from the map, that Latvia and Estonia are on Russia's border, and Lithuania as well, if you want to include that little enclave between Poland and Lithuania. But the fact is, these were very small states. It was early in the game, and the Russians were willing to live with it. But then the big trouble starts, and it comes in the famous Bucharest summit, NATO's Bucharest summit in April 2008, where at the end of the summit, a declaration is issued which says, NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO. The Russians made this perfectly clear. This was unacceptable. Russia's deputy foreign minister said, Georgia's and Ukraine's membership in the alliance is a huge strategic mistake which will have most serious consequences for pan-European security. Putin himself said, Georgia and Ukraine becoming part of NATO is a direct threat to Russia. You all remember that there was a war between Russia and Georgia in August 2008? That war was a consequence of this, because the Georgians thought we were sending them a signal that they could get uppity with the Russians and we would back them because they were going to become part of NATO. That's not what happened. And you know what happened. The Russians clobbered the Georgians, and Georgia is in deep trouble today because it thought it could become part of NATO. So you want to remember that April 2008 summit, very important. That declaration, very important. And then what happens is you have a war. So those are the deep causes, those three strategies: NATO expansion, EU expansion, and promoting democracy. What about the precipitating cause? The key events leading up to the coup. It's the coup of February 22nd, 2014 that's of enormous importance. That's what really throws the crisis into gear. Just think about that word, coup. Orange Revolution, promoting democracy, the coup, February 22nd, 2014. So the question is, what causes the coup? It all starts in November of 2013. At that point, Yanukovych, President Yanukovych, who's the head of Ukraine, is negotiating with the EU to form an association agreement that brings the EU and Ukraine much closer together. It's a step in the direction of incorporating Ukraine into the European Union, or to put it in slightly different terms, incorporating Ukraine into the West. The Russians make it clear that this is unacceptable. The Russians are willing to do a deal that involves the EU, Russia, the IMF, and Ukraine. But the idea that Ukraine is going to do a deal exclusively with the EU and the Russians are going to be left out in the cold is not something that Putin is willing to countenance. He puts significant pressure on the Ukrainians. He offers them a terrific deal. And as you can imagine, the EU is not offering Ukraine a particularly good deal, because you know how much corruption there is in Ukraine. And the EU wants Ukraine to eliminate that corruption, which the Ukrainians really don't want to do. So what Putin does is not only make it clear that that deal is not going to happen, but he often just offers a sweetheart deal of his own. So Yanukovych, on November 21st, says no to the EU. This leads to a series of protests. The Ukrainian government, truth be told, under Yanukovych, overreacts to the protests, which causes them to spiral out of control. And in January of 2014, you can see there, January 22nd, 2014, you have your first two deaths in the protests. These are the Maidan protests. And then in the February 18th through February 20th time period, lots of people die. It's really messy. And what happens is that a number of European foreign ministers, the German foreign minister, French foreign minister, they fly to Kiev, and a deal is worked out to have elections that will, in effect, remove Yanukovych from power. But the protesters refuse to accept the deal. And there are significant fascist elements among the protesters who are armed, right? There's killing on the Maidan. And as a result, Yanukovych flees for his life to Russia. And this all happens on February 22nd. So here are the key events after the coup. On February 23rd, Parliament votes to repeal minority language laws in the.
So I think that what I need to do is I need to actually come back and to try to emphasize something there, something that happened, is that Yanukovych, who was the head of Ukraine at the time, well, he was making soundings that he was going to be joining with the EU, and Russia basically offered him a better deal. Now, because this land is so split, it's a bit like, say, Northern Ireland is, in where that you know, some people want to be part of the United Kingdom, some people want to be part of the Republic of Ireland. And it was a bit like, say, the Ireland offering, say, some people here in Northern Ireland a bit of a deal. And, well, the deal didn't go down too well. But the EU then steps in, and this is what he's talking about. And the EU comes along, and what they did was that they brokered a deal which would ensure that there was going to be an election. And that in that election, Yanukovych was, well, he actually fled for his life because of the protest that was happening in Kiev or Kiev. Now, I think that we must actually explain why that it is that what you and I and everyone else has come to know as Kiev, a bit like, say, chicken Kiev. Well, it's not a chicken Kiev, it's a Kiev. But there is also a huge problem over language in Ukraine. Now, if you notice the top of this little document here, key events after the coup. So on February the 23rd, 2014, the Parliament votes to repeal minority language laws. Now, which laws were they repealing, and what does repeal even mean? Well, if you're from Northern Ireland, what you will have seen being repealed lately would have been the Act of the Union, which meant to say that, as the barrister Jim Allister would have said, that repealing Article 6 of the Act of Union was a bit like taking a leg away from a stool, which makes the stool unstable. And in the same sort of way, what happened in the Ukraine area was that when the EU brokered a deal to have an election, Yanukovych, who was I'm going to say the prime minister, he fled to Russia for safekeeping in case that he would have been killed. And what happened was that the parliament then, the people, the overriding power in the Kiev or the Kiev parliament, well, what they did was they voted to repeal the minority language laws, which were the Russian language laws. Now, we all know how that language can cause upset, how that language can be used to destabilize a country, how that language can be used to create the circumstances in where instability within a country occurs. In fact, we have been arguing that in Northern Ireland. But what is really interesting looking at this for me is that the same people that the EU, that is, that the Council of Europe, which isn't actually attached to the EU, but they certainly say that Irish is a minority language and it has to have rights-based approaches made to it, and it has to be enshrined in law. This is what they're saying when it comes to Northern Ireland. But yet they turn a blind eye, whilst that the parliament in Kiev or Kiev, depending on what side of the fence that you're on, Russians call it Kiev. Apparently, the people that would be wanting to join the EU within Yugoslavia, or Ukraine, what they want to do is that they call it Kiev. Now, here's what we're going to say, and we must emphasize, is that this makes the EU hypocrites. This makes the EU charlatans for turning a blind eye, whilst that the minority language laws in Ukraine are repealed. However, they insist that here in Northern Ireland, that minority language laws have to be upheld and enhanced and funded in a land in Northern Ireland, in where that people has killed each other in the past. But it doesn't matter to the EU whenever that what they are trying to do is that they are trying to aggress, and they're trying to consume, and they're trying to take over territory. And we learned that through the entire EU constitutional changing protocol here in Northern Ireland, that the EU, well, what they did was that they were participating in what is tantamount to a land grab, but yet here in Ukraine, they completely forget about. They don't take into consideration that this Ukraine is a hugely divided nation, in where, if you look at the charts from earlier, it shows you that there are, I'm going to say, and this is me hazarding a guess, but there must be somewhere in the region of the 40% Russian facing the people that want to join the EU people. Maybe they're in the majority, okay, But this is a divided land. And this is a land in where that really what should have happened, what should be happening, what should be happening the world over, the same as in Northern Ireland, that everyone needs to be taken into consideration, that everyone's beliefs need to be taken into consideration, that everyone's history, heritage, and culture, it all needs to be taken into consideration. Because if we're going to enhance one at the expense of another, well, what you see today unfolding in front of your very eyes, which has caused the circumstances and where that the people of Ukraine are being, well, they're the losers. There's a lot of people losing their lives as a result of what is happening. The people of Ukraine are the real losers, and the people of the Western world, well, if you think that you're losing now, where do you see what unfolds as a result of rich man's aggression in a way that poor man's blood is the real cost to this rich man's aggression? Let's play on. We're not going to stay with this for too much longer, but what we really need to do is we need to understand what it is that's happening in Ukraine, understanding that this is a divided land, understanding that there is a real solution to this problem. But just like Northern Ireland, you see, the globalists, they don't want the solution. They want the land for themselves. And who loses? Well, ordinary, decent people are always the losers whenever this happens.
East. This is basically the Russian language. And then on February 27th, Russian units begin seizing checkpoints in the Crimea. On the 28th, additional Russian forces begin moving into the Crimea. The Russians didn't conquer or invade Crimea. Actually, the Russians didn't invade Crimea. They were already there because they had a leasing agreement. There's a naval base at Sevastopol, and the Russians were leasing that naval base from Ukraine. So they had military forces there. So when it says Russian units begin seizing checkpoints on the 27th, those were Russian units that were already there. Then additional Russian forces begin moving in on the 28th. And then on the 6th, the 16th, and the 18th, you have a scenario, you have a handful of events that lead to Russia incorporating Crimea. And then, of course, shortly after that, conflict breaks out in eastern Ukraine. And although we do not have a lot of hard evidence that the Russians are physically involved in eastern Ukraine, I think it's quite clear that they are physically involved, that there are Russian troops there. How many is very hard to tell from the outside. I think it's very clear that the Russian government is going to great lengths to make sure that those pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine are capable of maintaining a certain amount of independence, and I'll talk more about this in a second. Okay, understanding the process of wrecking Ukraine, and he's telling the West in very simple terms, you have two choices. You either back off, right, and we go back to the status quo ante before February 22nd, 2014, where Ukraine is a buffer state, or you continue to play these games where you try and take Ukraine and make it a Western bastion on our doorstep, in which case we'll wreck the country. And they are, of course, now in the process of wrecking it, right? And they're going to keep this conflict going for as long as they have to. That's the basic game here. Again, two steps. One, took Crimea. No way they're going to ever let Crimea become a NATO base. And remember, the name of the game here is to make Ukraine part of NATO. Not happening. And they're not getting Crimea. We've taken Crimea, we're keeping it, number one. And number two, you want a frozen conflict or you want to wreck Ukraine so that it can't become part of the West. Question number two here is what motivates this? What motivates this is that Russia is a great power and it has absolutely no interest in allowing the United States and its allies to take a big piece of real estate of great strategic importance on its western border and incorporate it into the West. This should be hardly surprising to the United States of America. As all of you know, we have a Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine basically says that the Western Hemisphere is our backyard, and nobody from a distant region is allowed to move military forces into the Western Hemisphere. I can tell from looking at the audience that most of you are old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis like I am. You remember how we went stark raving crazy at the idea of the Soviets putting military forces in Cuba? This is unacceptable. Nobody puts military forces in the Western Hemisphere. That's what the Monroe Doctrine is all about. Can you imagine 20 years from now a powerful China forming a military alliance with Canada and Mexico and moving Chinese military forces onto Canadian and Mexican soil, and us just standing there and saying, this is no problem. We're all 21st century people, and worrying about Chinese forces there is what 19th century people like Vladimir Putin worry about. Of course that's not going to happen. We're going to maintain the Monroe Doctrine with regard to China just as we did with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So nobody should be surprised that the Russians were apoplectic about the idea of us putting Ukraine on the western side of the ledger. And by the way, they told us, I gave you the quotes, in the wake of the Bucharest summit. I told you what happened in August 2008 with the Georgia war. The precedents were there. The rhetoric was there. They told us. But we did not stop our efforts to make Ukraine part of the West. And the Russians responded. Was it surprising? For some reason, President Obama and virtually all of the elites in the West were surprised. I guess this is because they're 21st century people, right? And they think that balance of power politics doesn't matter anymore. If you think these people in Washington and most Americans are having trouble dealing with the Russians, you can't believe how much trouble we're going to have with the Chinese. I'm very popular in China. I go to China quite often. And I usually start my talks by saying, it's good to be back among my people. Because when I'm in China, I'm intellectually much more at home there than I am in Washington. Because in Beijing, much like in Moscow, you're dealing with 19th century people like me. Whereas in Washington, you're dealing with 21st century people. I think the Chinese are going to eat our lunch, right? Talk a bit about the conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom is that Putin is the main cause of the crisis. Some say he's either crazy or irrational. Angela Merkel was making this argument for a while. He's bent on creating a greater Russia, and he bears marked resemblance to Adolf Hitler. Say a few words about each of these. I know a great deal about Adolf Hitler. I've written and I teach extensively on Nazi Germany's behavior in the 30s and during World War II. The idea that he bears any resemblance to Adolf Hitler is laughable in the extreme. It's hard to believe that serious people make that argument. The idea that he's bent on creating a greater Russia, I think if he could do it, he'd do it. He can't.
Well, there we go, people. What it is that we're going to have to do, and I'm going to explain to you actually why. If you bear with me for a second, we're just going to remove this here from the screen. Is that it seems that social media, specifically Facebook, well, they are hell bent in ensuring that people don't see the truth. I mean, what we can do via the software that we're using, we can see analytics, and we can see that at the minute there's 6 people watching on the YouTube channel. And the only people that can get onto any channels at all on Facebook here are on Restore UK, and it seems that only the admins are the only people that can actually access the channels, and there's no live chat or anything else. There you go. We'll go to try to tell that truth, and now we're all banged up. So now we seem to have jammed up whenever we're now exposing what is happening. So there we seem to be back again. So I'll tell you what we're going to do is that we're going to just close, because what we wanted to do is that we wanted to document this, and we do want to document this, and it hasn't been removed from YouTube. And in fact, that came from YouTube. A lot of that, the stuff that we were playing this evening. And what it does is that it charts the course of what it is that's happening in Ukraine, the very fact that Ukraine is a divided land, the very fact that in 2014, that whenever the EU brokered a deal and whenever Yanukovych escaped to Russia, well, the parliament in the Ukraine, what they did was that they moved against the Russians, the Russian speakers within Ukraine, and what they did was that they repealed their language laws for minority languages, and these are the circumstances which breeds conflict, and we've seen it here in Northern Ireland. These are the circumstances which breeds conflict, and here we have the EU. This EU that are forcing Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom, that are aggressing upon our land. Well, they are manipulating in Ukraine, ensuring that the language rights wouldn't be afforded to the Russians that live there, which does cause conflict. And and we did actually hear in Chuck Feeney's day how that they were sending people from Irish universities out to Estonia universities, trying to ensure that people were being taught that there is a big bad aggressor, that is Russia. But I believe from the bottom of my heart that this is a rich man's war, a war for land, in where that expansionism would be the key word, and this is a war in which that will cost hundreds and hundreds, thousands of thousands, if not millions of lives, if it's not checked, if it's not put right very, very soon. And not just that, this is a war like no other, in where that the cost of living here in Northern Ireland, here in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, in right across the Western world, where the cost of living is going absolutely through the roof, in where that people, ordinary people, and that's what our main concern is, ordinary people losing their lives because of, for some people's ideological reasons, they decide that a peaceful solution, well, it couldn't be sought. Shame on them. That's all I can say is shame on them. And be careful who you support in this world. Be careful what you support, because simply all that glitters, it is not gold. Now, what we're going to do is that we're going to close this screen down, because we can see that the social media, that the corruption won't let the truth be told. So what we're going to do is that we're going to close this screen down, and we're going to form another broadcast, and we're going to come back and we're going to literally talk about some events here in the United Kingdom. It seems as if that if you're coming too close to exposing the truth in this world, well, as Orwell would have said, telling the truth in times of universal deceit, it will be like a revolutionary act. Thanks very much for coming along. What we'll do, people, is that we'll play us out with, I guess, a little song on the way out, just for the purpose of documenting what it was that we were here to do this evening. And I'm going to say something, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about corruption. We're going to talk about how that freedom of speech is being curtailed in our own land by social media giants, which don't have the right to stop your freedom of speech, your freedom of expression, your right to point out what it is that you see, most especially whenever people the world over are losing their lives for this rich man's aggression upon other people's land. So here we go. What we're going to do is we're going to play us out with a little song, which I think is very fitting for what it is that we're here to speak about this evening. This is the worst event that we've ever had because of the curtailing of our message, because that I'm looking again on Facebook, where our huge numbers come from. Only the admins on Restore UK are able to see what it is that we're doing. Everybody else has been blocked off. So that is the corruption that you're living amongst today in 2022. Playing is out with A Broken Land, because a broken land is exactly what it is, exactly what it will continue to be if we continue to trust those for their own ideological reasons that would set ordinary people against each other, not caring one jot or one tittle about the lives of those ordinary people. Thanks very much yet again for coming along. We'll be starting another broadcast within the next 10 minutes here at Restore UK. So watch out. We'll be back very, very soon. Watch this video as we go.
I looked outside. What did I see? A little bird. He looked at me. I lured him close. With a piece of bread. And then I smashed. His little head. The moral of the story is. You want some head. You need some bread. Right turn. Huh.
They breathe
What did I see? What did I see? A little bird. A little bird. He looked at me. He looked at me. I lured him close. I lured him close. With a piece of bread. With a piece of bread. And then I smashed. And then I smashed his little head.